June 6, 1944. 5:47 in the morning. The English Channel churns beneath a ceiling of iron-gray clouds, its cold waters whipped into froth by winds that taste of salt and diesel fuel. Along the Normandy coastline, German sentries in concrete bunkers strain their eyes against the pre-dawn darkness, their breath misting in the damp air. One young soldier, Gefreiter Klaus Hoffmann of the 716th Infantry Division, lifts his field glasses to scan the horizon for the third time in an hour. What he sees makes his hands begin to tremble. The sea itself appears to be moving, not with waves but with ships. Thousands upon thousands of ships, stretching from horizon to horizon, like a vast metallic forest growing from the water. The rumble reaches him before his mind can process the sight, a deep, sustained thunder that seems to emanate from the earth itself. He reaches for the field telephone with fingers gone suddenly numb, but the words catch in his throat. How does one report that the impossible has arrived? For 4 years, the German Wehrmacht had conquered a continent. From the fjords of Norway to the deserts of North Africa, from the Atlantic coast of France to the frozen steppes outside Moscow, Hitler's armies had redrawn the map of Europe with mechanized precision and ruthless efficiency. The fortress they called Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, stretched across thousands of miles of coastline, defended by millions of men, protected by the greatest system of coastal fortifications ever constructed. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel himself had spent months inspecting these defenses, driving his engineers to plant millions of mines, erect thousands of obstacles, and construct bunkers that could withstand direct naval bombardment. The Atlantic Wall, they called it with pride and confidence. Even the most optimistic German strategists acknowledged that an Allied invasion would come eventually, but they believed they were ready. They had studied the debacle at Dieppe in 1942, where a Canadian-British force had been thrown back into the sea with devastating casualties. They understood the challenges of amphibious warfare, the logistics, the timing, the vulnerability of troops caught between ship and shore. They had done the mathematics, calculated the tonnage, assessed the distances. An invasion, they concluded, would require months of preparation visible from reconnaissance aircraft. It would come at a major port where supplies could be landed efficiently. It would involve perhaps 50,000 troops in the initial wave, a force that could be contained, counterattacked, and driven back before reinforcements could arrive. The Channel itself was Germany's ally, unpredictable, violent, and unforgiving. What the German High Command did not understand, what they could not conceive, was the industrial capacity of the United States of America. They did not understand what it meant when a nation of 130 million people, protected by 2 oceans and blessed with seemingly endless resources, decided to turn its entire economy toward a single purpose. They had read the reports, seen the numbers on paper, but numbers remained abstract until translated into reality. And on this June morning, reality arrived on their doorstep with a force that defied comprehension. General Erich Marx, commander of the 84 Corps defending the Normandy sector, received the first fragmentary reports at his headquarters in St. Lo at approximately 6:15 a.m. Paratrooper landings behind the lines. Naval bombardment along multiple beaches. Small unit actions disrupting communications. He studied the map with growing concern, but not yet alarm. Raids, perhaps. Diversions. The real invasion would come at Calais. That's what all the intelligence suggested. But as the morning progressed and reports continued flooding in, the scope of what was happening began to crystallize. By 8 a.m., the situation maps showed something unprecedented, simultaneous landings across a 50-mile front. Thousands of vessels, hundreds of aircraft. Not probing attacks, but a sustained, massive assault hitting multiple sectors at once. Marx, a veteran of the Eastern Front who had seen the worst the Red Army could throw against Wehrmacht positions, found himself staring at the reports with a sense of disbelief that bordered on denial. He turned to his operations officer and spoke words that would later be recorded in the unit war diary. They have brought an army across the sea. An entire army. But it was not merely an army. It was 160,000 men landed in a single day, a force larger than the entire Continental Army that George Washington commanded during the American Revolution, delivered across 100 miles of open ocean with precision timing. It was 5,000 ships and landing craft of every description, from massive battleships to small wooden boats. It was 11,000 aircraft providing air cover, so complete that German fighters could barely take off without being shot down. It was a logistics operation so vast that it included portable harbors, entire artificial ports that would be towed across the Channel and assembled on the Norman coast. It was millions of gallons of fuel, tens of thousands of vehicles, mountains of ammunition and supplies, all coordinated with a level of organization that suggested resources without limit and planning without equal. The German soldiers watching from their bunkers that morning had been told repeatedly about American weakness. The propaganda had been consistent and confident. Americans were soft, undisciplined, more interested in Hollywood films and jazz music than in the hard realities of warfare. They were the mongrel products of a nation without racial purity, without martial tradition, without the iron will that sustained the German soldier through hardship. They had factories, yes, but factories could not replace fighting spirit. They had wealth, but wealth could not overcome superior training and battlefield experience. The Africa Corps veterans spoke dismissively of American troops they'd fought in Tunisia, brave enough, perhaps, but poorly led and quick to retreat under pressure. The Eastern Front veterans were even more contemptuous. The Americans had never faced the Red Army in winter, had never held a position against a Soviet assault. What did they know of real war? What they knew was mathematics. What they understood was production. While German factories struggled to replace losses, hampered by Allied bombing and shortages of raw materials, American shipyards were launching a new merchant vessel every day. While German tank production never exceeded 2,000 units per month, even at its peak, American factories were producing 5,000 tanks monthly by mid-1943. The M4 Sherman tanks rumbling off the assembly lines in Detroit might not match the German Tiger in individual combat, but America could build 50 Shermans for every Tiger Germany produced. And on this June morning, those mathematical abstractions became visceral reality for the defenders of Normandy. Overlooking what the Allies designated as Omaha Beach, had been awakened by the naval bombardment at 5:50 a.m. He'd rushed to his observation post expecting to see a few destroyers, perhaps a preliminary raid. Instead, he found himself staring at what appeared to be the entire Allied fleet. Battleships set off the coast, their massive guns illuminating the pre-dawn darkness with muzzle flashes that looked like lightning. Behind them, stretching back toward England, were transport ships stacked so densely they seemed to form a bridge of steel across the water. And moving toward his position were landing craft by the hundreds, churning the water, white as they advanced in waves. He grabbed the field phone and reported what he saw to regimental headquarters. The officer on the other end asked him to repeat the numbers. Yankee repeated them, then added, "I am not exaggerating. I am looking at them now. There are hundreds of ships. Perhaps thousands. The ocean is covered with them." His machine gunners opened fire as the first landing craft approached the beach, their MG-42s sending streams of bullets into the water at 1,200 rounds per minute. Americans fell in the surf, were cut down on the beach, crumpled behind the thin cover of steel obstacles. For a few terrible hours, it seemed the Atlantic wall might hold. Bodies piled up on the sand. Landing craft burned. The water turned red. But still they came. More boats. More men. More tanks. The volume was overwhelming, not in quality but in sheer, relentless quantity. For every American who fell, 2 more appeared. For every landing craft destroyed, 3 more reached the shore. The mathematical equation was inexorable. Germany could not kill them faster than America could land them. By mid-morning, Yankees' ammunition was running low, a chronic problem that plagued German forces throughout the war. He'd been promised resupply, but the roads behind his position were cratered by naval bombardment and strafed by fighter bombers that appeared the moment anything moved. His radio crackled with requests for artillery support, but the artillery batteries were under sustained naval fire from battleships that could drop 14-inch shells with terrifying accuracy. He watched American engineers working under fire to clear obstacles, bulldozers pushing aside defenses it had taken months to construct, naval demolition teams blowing gaps in the beach barriers. The coordination was remarkable, everything timed, everything planned, everything executed with mechanical efficiency despite the chaos of battle. These were men who had crossed an ocean to be here, and they were not going back. The sound that defined that day was not gunfire or explosions, but engines. The constant, unceasing roar of engines, ship engines, aircraft engines, tank engines, truck engines, the rattling diesel motors of landing craft, and the high-pitched whine of fighters overhead. It was the sound of industry translated into warfare, the sound of American manufacturing capacity given voice. Every German soldier who survived that day would remember that sound, the way it built throughout the morning, growing louder as more ships arrived, more planes appeared, more vehicles rolled off the landing craft. It was a sound that said, "We have more." Whatever you do to us, we have more. In his headquarters bunker 12 miles inland, General Marks struggled to coordinate a response with forces that were scattered, undermanned, and increasingly cut off from communication. The carefully prepared counterattack plans required armored divisions that were stationed too far away, awaiting Hitler's personal authorization to move. The Führer, asleep in Berchtesgaden when the invasion began, could not be awakened. His staff feared his temper more than they feared the Allied armies. Rommel was in Germany, celebrating his wife's birthday, confident that the weather was too poor for an invasion. The command structure that had conquered Europe with such efficiency now found itself paralyzed by over-centralization and excessive caution. Meanwhile, on the beaches, American soldiers were doing something the German planning had considered impossible. They were consolidating, moving inland, establishing positions faster than local forces could contain them. What struck the German officers most forcefully was not American bravery. They had expected the Allies to fight hard, but American abundance. Prisoners captured in the first hours of the invasion carried rations unlike anything German soldiers had seen in years. The K-ration packs included chocolate, cigarettes, sugar, coffee, canned meat, luxuries that had vanished from Wehrmacht mess halls by 1942. The American rifles came packed in grease, so thick it had to be wiped away. Their uniforms were new, their boots unpatched, their equipment pristine. Everything was new. Everything was abundant. It was the abundance that was demoralizing, the sense that these soldiers represented a nation so wealthy it could afford to feed its army like kings while simultaneously building the largest invasion fleet in human history. A German intelligence officer, interrogating American prisoners in the days following the invasion, wrote in his report, "The enemy soldier does not understand deprivation. He expects regular meals, hot coffee, dry socks, mail from home, and medical care as a matter of course. What is remarkable is that his supply system delivers these things even in combat conditions. We are not fighting an army. We are fighting an economic system." That economic system had achieved something that seemed impossible through a combination of planning, organization, and sheer material wealth. The invasion had required 2 years of preparation, but it was preparation backed by resources that Germany simply could not match. The artificial Mulberry harbors alone, massive floating port facilities constructed in England and towed across the Channel, represented more steel and concrete than Germany had used for all coastal fortifications in Normandy. The fuel pipeline that engineers would lay beneath the Channel, codenamed Pluto, would pump more gasoline in a single day than the entire Wehrmacht consumed on some fronts. The coordination of naval forces, air forces, and ground forces across 5 different landing beaches required a level of inter-service cooperation and shared communication technology that the Germans had never achieved. The transformation in German thinking did not happen all at once. It was a slow dawning of understanding that spread through the ranks like a virus. On June 6th, many German commanders still believed the invasion could be contained. By June 7th, that confidence had begun to erode. By June 10th, with Allied forces pushing inland and the beachhead growing wider each day, the reality became undeniable. They were not facing an army that could be defeated in a single decisive battle. They were facing a hydra, cut off one head, and 2 more appeared. Destroy a battalion, and 3 more landed the next day. The mathematics of industrial warfare had tilted irrevocably against them. General Major Wilhelm Richter, whose 716th Infantry Division bore the brunt of the initial assault, wrote in his after-action report, "The enemy's superiority in material was so overwhelming that tactical skill became almost irrelevant. My men fought with courage and determination, but courage cannot stop a battleship. Determination cannot replace ammunition that does not arrive. We were soldiers fighting an avalanche." The system. That was ultimately what landed 160,000 troops on a hostile shore in a single day. Not individual heroism, though there was heroism in abundance, but a system built on American organizational genius and backed by American industrial might. It was the system that planned the invasion down to the last detail. The system that built the landing craft and trained the crews. The system that assembled the supplies and scheduled the ships. The system that coordinated naval gunfire with air strikes, with ground assaults. The system that said, "We will bring an army across the sea, and we will do it with precision." That system was the product of a particular kind of society, a democratic, capitalist, industrialized society that valued efficiency and innovation, that believed problems could be solved through application of resources and intelligence, that organized its economy around mass production and consumption. The Nazis had dismissed such a society as weak, corrupted by materialism and racial mixing. They discovered instead that it was a society capable of extraordinary mobilization when threatened, able to turn its consumer economy into a war economy with remarkable speed, willing to project power across oceans with systematic determination. The irony was not lost on some German observers. They had started a war based on Lebensraum, living space, claiming Germany needed territorial expansion to secure resources and achieve economic viability. America had demonstrated that a nation with access to resources and a developed industrial economy could project power globally without conquest. The territorial empire the Nazis sought through war, America had achieved through trade and production. And when forced to fight, that economic power translated directly into military power with devastating effect. As summer advanced and Allied armies broke out of the Normandy bocage, beginning the race across France that would reach the German border by September, the German high command faced a reality they had successfully avoided for 5 years. They were losing a war of production, and no amount of tactical brilliance could overcome that fundamental disparity. The reports arriving at OKW headquarters in Berlin chronicled a military catastrophe in slow motion. Divisions ground down to skeleton strength, equipment losses that could not be replaced, supply lines stretched to breaking, reinforcements that existed only on paper. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, who replaced Rommel after the latter was wounded in an air attack, wrote to Hitler in August, "The enemy's material superiority is crushing. We are fighting the equivalent of 20 divisions with the strength of 6. Every battle we win tactically, we lose strategically because we cannot replace our losses, and the enemy can." The final symbolism came in the form of a single photograph, widely circulated among German troops in late summer 1944. It showed a Liberty ship unloading at one of the artificial harbors in Normandy, a line of trucks waiting to be loaded with supplies. In the background, stacked on the dock, were crates marked with stencils, medical supplies, ammunition, rations, spare parts. The photographer, identity unknown, had captured in one image the essence of American military power: systematic, abundant, inexhaustible. A German soldier who kept a copy of this photograph in his wallet throughout the war wrote on the back, "This is what we lost to." June 6, 1944, remains in history as D-Day, the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. But for the German generals stunned by the scale of the Allied landing, it represented something deeper: the revelation that modern warfare was no longer decided primarily by courage, training, or tactical genius, but by industrial capacity and organizational efficiency. America had not merely invaded Europe. It had demonstrated that democracy, with all its apparent chaos and inefficiency, could mobilize resources and coordinate efforts on a scale that totalitarian systems could not match. The 160,000 troops landed in a single day were not just soldiers, they were ambassadors of a different way of organizing society, one that valued abundance over austerity, system over heroism, pragmatic efficiency over ideological purity. The lesson of that longest day was not that American soldiers were braver than German soldiers. Both sides fought with courage, but that American society had created a system capable of projecting overwhelming power across an ocean while simultaneously fighting another war 6,000 miles in the opposite direction. The Atlantic Wall, that massive engineering project meant to protect Fortress Europe, had been breached not by superior tactics but by superior resources: more ships, more planes, more tanks, more fuel, more ammunition, more everything. The mathematics were simple and devastating. Germany could not win an arithmetic contest against a nation that produced half the world's industrial output. In the end, the stunning of German generals was not merely tactical surprise. Intelligence had warned an invasion was imminent, but conceptual shock. They had prepared to fight an army. What landed on June 6th was something more fundamental: an entire nation's industrial and organizational capacity concentrated into a single operational thrust. Behind every soldier on those beaches stood the assembly lines of Detroit, the shipyards of Norfolk, the aircraft plants of California, the training camps of Texas, an entire continental economy mobilized for war. The German generals, watching their defenses crumble under that overwhelming pressure, understood too late that they had miscalculated not American courage or competence, but American capacity. The wave that broke against the Norman beaches that gray June morning was not merely military but industrial, not simply tactical but systematic, the wave of a society that had transformed its peacetime abundance into wartime production without breaking stride. And once that wave began rolling, nothing could stop it. Not the Atlantic Wall, not German tactical skill, not ideology or willpower or fighting spirit. The tide had turned, and it carried the irresistible force of American industrial democracy toward inevitable victory. The German generals, watching from their bunkers and headquarters, saw the future arrive on landing craft and Liberty ships, and understood with terrible clarity that the war was lost, not in a single battle, but in the mathematics of production that made 160,000 troops in a single day not a miracle, but a measurable achievement of systematic planning. That is the truth that echoed through German headquarters that day, and in the weeks that followed, they had provoked a nation that waged war as it did everything else, with abundance, efficiency, and systematic organization. And in the machinery of modern warfare, those qualities proved more decisive than any ideology or warrior spirit. The ocean had turned to steel, the sky had filled with aircraft, and the future had arrived in overwhelming numbers. The stunning was complete and irrevocable.